Coming up this Tuesday, January 20th at 2 p.m., the Rady JCC's Music and Mavens concert and lecture series invites audiences on a fascinating journey into ancient history, exploring the Ark of the Covenant and the ancient city of Shiloh, where the Ark is believed to have resided for more than 350 years. Forget Indiana Jones. This is a real-world archaeology brought vividly to life by one of Canada's leading authorities on biblical archaeology and the ancient region of Canaan and its agricultural traditions. The lecture will be presented by Haskel Greenfield, Distinguished Professor of Anthropology, co-director of the Near Eastern and Biblical Archaeology Lab, and coordinator of Judaic Studies at the University of Manitoba. His talk, The Ark of the Covenant, Where Is It Now?, promises to be an engaging, thought-provoking exploration that brings ancient texts and archaeological evidence into thrilling conversation. And joining me here in the Classic 107 studio to talk about his lecture, The Ark of the Covenant, Where Is It Now?, is Haskel Greenfield. Hi, Haskel. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here.
Okay, before we get to Shiloh, for those who don't know, can you give a brief explanation as to what the Ark of the Covenant is?
The Ark of the Covenant, it's actually not a really good translation because it's really our own Habrit, Brit is really translated as the covenant, and it's really reflecting on the covenant that Abraham made with God long time ago, almost 4,000 years ago, that Jews would be, for lack of a better word, it's really a bad word, the chosen people, which doesn't mean that we are better, doesn't mean that we, are superior to anyone else. It just means we have more responsibilities to God than anyone else.
Mm-hmm. And so, what's in the Ark of the Covenant, other than the Ten Commandments? There's also the rod, etc.?
There's the Ten Commandments, which is the two tablets. In Hebrew, they say the Shtei Luchot. And there's the rod or staff of Moses. And I think there's a cloak in there as well. Mm-hmm. But the Ark of the Covenant is designed so that the Spirit of God could sit on top of it, and there would be a visual essence of what God didn't look like he didn't look like a human being. It's an aura that would sit there.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I was reading is there's a pot of manna in the Ark.
Supposedly, there's a pot of manna.
You're an expert in agricultural practices. What is manna?
We actually don't know exactly what manna is. Manna was provided by God from heaven every morning while the Israelites were wandering in the desert, so they would have fresh, healthy food to keep them going. But there's there's no equivalent, real life equivalent that's around there today. If we could find the Ark, maybe we could open it up to see what a manna really was.
I want to talk about Shiloh. Many know about the first temple in Jerusalem holding the Ark of the Covenant and being placed in the Holy of Holies by King Solomon. But really, Shiloh was the first place where the Ark rested for 369 years. What's the significance of the location? And can you talk about where Shiloh is in relation to Jerusalem?
Sure. Shiloh is about 60 miles, or about, say, 100 kilometers north of Jerusalem, along the spine of mountains. So if you look at Hebron, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Nablus, all these are on this top of the mountain ridge that defines the geography of the region. And Shiloh is a small tell. It's not a big one. It's only about 3 or 4 hectares. So a hectare is 100 by 100 meters. Mm-hmm. So it's not very big. It's on top of a low hill, inside of a very well watered valley with high mountains around it, and it seems that Joshua, after Moses died in Jordan, and he wasn't allowed to cross the Jordan River, Joshua with the Israelites crossed the Jordan River, went to Jericho, and that's when they they marched around the walls of Jericho 7 times, blowing the shofar, carrying the ark, and on the 7th round, the walls of Jericho fell down. After that, Joshua went inland in order to first meet with the various Canaanite rulers of local cities, some of whom joined with the Israelites and ultimately converted to Judaism. Some fought against the Israelites, and the Israelites won. But so Joshua went inland and eventually chose Shiloh as the location where he's going to settle down himself in the territory of the tribe of Ephraim, and brought the Ark of the Covenant there. And the tabernacle, which was the tent structure that surrounded it.
And then Shiloh, it was captured by the Philistines. They took the ark with them.
Well, actually, Shiloh wasn't captured by the Philistines. What we know is that with Philistines who are on the coast, who are on the coastal region, who have no relationship to the modern Palestinian people who call themselves that, because the Philistines were destroyed first by the Assyrians, in the 7th century BCE, and then by the Babylonians, who finally deported or destroyed all the Philistines. I'm sorry, what was the question?
I guess the question is, so the Ark of the Covenant was taken by the Philistines, is my understanding?
Yes,
and then how did they get it back?
Because after Joshua died, there was a series of high priests who would conduct all the ceremonies in the tabernacle where the ark was being held. But the Israelites were battling with the Philistines. The Israelites were inland. They, the kingdoms of Judah and Israel, which was after Solomon, had split. But those were all inland. The Philistines controlled the coast, and so there was constant battles. And you can read about this in the book of Samuel, for example, with David going back and forth, battling, or sometimes joining with the Philistines because he had to flee from Saul. But if you know the book of Samuel, there's the story of Hannah, in it, which is the beginning of the book of Samuel. And Hannah was Samuel's mother. And she went to, Israelites before the time of the temple in Jerusalem would go to Shiloh to do their pilgrimages. She went to Shiloh to beg for a son, and met up with then the high priest Eli, who called her, because she was crying and standing at the gates of the tabernacle, and he thought she was drunk. And she finally explained to him what was the problem, and he blessed her, and she went away. And a year later, she had a baby, which became the prophet Samuel. But the high priest Eli allowed his 2 sons to take the ark with the Israelite army that was battling the Philistines down lower down, and the Israelites lost the battle. His sons were killed. The ark was captured. We think it's not certain that the Philistines may have come and sacked Shiloh. There's no real evidence. It's kind of an interpretation of events. And archaeologically, we don't really see a sacking of Shiloh at that time. But when Eli heard about his sons and the ark being lost, sons being killed and the ark being lost, and the Israelite army being destroyed, he was sitting on an extension of the gate, what we call the arm of the gate, and fell off and cracked his head probably and died as a result. So the Philistines took the ark at that point.
And how did it get back to the Jews so that it could be put in the first temple?
Well, the Philistines took the ark and paraded it to different Philistine cities, and it ended up, I think, in the city of Ashdod at one point. And then there was a massive plague broke out, and the Philistines said, "Okay, maybe the God of the Israelites is really not happy with us for taking the ark." So they sent it to another Philistine city where the plague continued, and that was Ekron. And Ekron is slightly inland, and it's kind of almost at the mouth of the valley leading toward the Israelite town of Bet Shemesh, near the modern city of Bet Shemesh in central Israel. And so the Philistines put the ark on a wagon with two oxen, no drivers, and pointed it in the direction of Bet Shemesh, and the oxen brought it to Bet Shemesh. And my Israeli colleagues several years ago from Tel Aviv University excavated Bet Shemesh. I'm working on some of the animal remains from the site now. They excavate, and we know, if I remember correctly from the book of Samuel, that the Israelites took the ark in Bet Shemesh and put it into the temple. And my Israeli colleagues have found that temple. And we've been analyzing the remains of it ever since. And that's where it sat, probably for two generations, through the time of Saul, and David tried to arrange for it to come to Jerusalem, and it was brought up kind of halfway up the mountains to a place called Kiryat Shearim, which is today, there's a big monastery on top of Kiryat Shearim, but the Israelis have excavated and found the proper levels for it. And they got that far, and it started to fall off the wagon, and one of the men grabbed it and to stabilize it and died. And so David decided, no, the ark has to stay there. And that's where it stayed until, I think, the time of Solomon.
The first temple was destroyed, and it was
in 586 BCE.
Yeah, and the ark was taken again. Can you talk about some of the theories of where the ark is now?
It's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a problem. As much as I love Raiders of the Lost Ark and Steven Spielberg, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, they follow along the theory that after Solomon died, Pharaoh Shoshank, or Shishak, depending upon if you're looking at Egyptian records or Hebrew records, comes up and starts sacking cities in ancient Israel. And we know we know he got to Gezer. We know he got to Jerusalem. It's talked about he sacked the city, took the treasures from the temple. And then there's not so many references to the ark afterwards. So the whole idea with the Spielberg movie is that it went to Egypt with Shoshank, and that's where Indiana Jones finds in the movie. However, there's during the reign of the 16th king of Judah, the kingdom of Judah, this is somewhere about 610 BCE. There's a mention, I can't remember if it's Chronicles or Kings, but there's a mention that he's admonishing the Levites not to take the ark out of the temple, not to parade it around. The implication is that's too holy. It also could be so old, so fragile. So 300 years after Shoshank comes and sacks the temple treasury, there's a mention of the ark in ancient Judah. But after that, it's completely disappeared. And the city is sacked and destroyed in 586 BCE, basically 20 or so years later. So we don't know. Some theories have been that it was hidden away and it's somewhere underneath the Mount Moriah, which is where the temple was. Other people think it was taken to Egypt. Some say taken to Babylon. There's no record of it showing up in Babylon. No record of it showing up in Egypt. We don't know. I mean, in a theological sense, I've heard propositions that God took it back. So in which case you'll never find it.
Yeah. Before we talk about your research for the lecture, can you talk about the Near Eastern Biblical Archaeology Laboratory at the University of Manitoba, and how does it help you in your research?
Well, about 15 years ago, my wife Tina and I, she's a professor at the University of Winnipeg and also works in Israel and Iraq and Turkey and other places, often for British Museum and University of Chicago projects on ancient Assyrian and ancient Sumerian cities. In many ways, she does more exciting stuff than I do. But we, the two of us, established at St. Paul's College at the University of Manitoba the Near Eastern and Biblical Archaeology Laboratory within St. Paul's College, because we needed a place where we could bring back material from our excavations in different places related to biblical or Near Eastern kind of research, analyze it, before it's returned back to the home countries. And so we've established a state-of-the-art with high-end microscopes. Like, for example, we have a scanning electron microscope in there, so we can look at fragments on pottery or bones going down to micron levels and help determine where it comes from, how it was made, things like that. But it's the only state-of-the-art such laboratory dedicated to Near Eastern biblical research in Canada.
Oh, wow, fabulous. Your talk on Tuesday is going to be on your research at Ancient Shiloh. Can you talk about that research, and what is the talk going to focus on Tuesday specifically?
Well, the research is, I'm just there in support. My colleague from the United States, in particular Scott Stripling, he's the director of the project, and it's a multi-year project in order to stabilize the site, because it was excavated back in the early 20th century and then later 20th century, was left open, and the rains have been destroying it little by little. So a lot of the work has gone into conservation to preserve it. The goal of the project hopefully would have been to find the tabernacle. Now, what we know from the book of Samuel is that, we know that the original tabernacle was a tented structure that went around the ark, and it was divided into two parts: a holy of holies and a more general place, and only the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, could go into the holy of holies. Yet somewhere in the book of Samuel, you can see that it's no longer a tented structure with walls that are fabric, but it's a building with a roof that's a tent, which kind of makes sense. If you can start burning sacrifices inside, you don't want to have a solid roof on it. But so we know, and the question is, for a long time, historians and archaeologists thought that the tabernacle was outside, because right to the north of the site, literally 20 meters away, is a huge rectangular structure cut into the rock. And that traditionally is where people thought it was. But in fact, Israeli archaeologists have gone back and re-excavated and refined, and they realized that is a Roman and Byzantine quarry. And that's why all these rocks were cut out. So it's not the tabernacle. But it also doesn't make sense. If you have something holy, and Shiloh is a walled city, why would you put it outside the walls of the city? Yeah. Where there were wolves, jackals, hyenas, lions still. Remember the story of David, slaying a lion. All these animals were really still out there, bears even. Why would you leave your most holy thing outside the city and you're sitting inside the city where it's protected? So we, given the fact that we know now that that the structure outside is a quarry, Scott Stripling and his colleagues have been looking inside the city for evidence of a structure. And we know the dimensions of the tabernacle, and they found some buildings that sort of fit that dimensions, but they're working on the dating to see if it's even the right dates. But there's a real problem, because there's a contradiction in the dating system that exists. There is the biblical text that says that the tabernacles, well, the ark sat at Shiloh for 300 some odd years. But Israeli archaeologists, in the refining of chronology and using very strict scientific methodology, they are saying that the time period that something like the ark, well, a site like Shiloh was occupied when the ark would have been there, probably is less than 100 years. And that goes into a whole discussion of dating, ancient biblical events, and just shows you how difficult it is to take a text literally versus scientifically investigate. And what do you do when the two don't match?
Mm-hmm. So the talk is mostly about just finding the building at Shiloh that had the temple.
I mean, that's a little part of it, but I mean that building, it'd be great if the building we found would be it, but you got to remember the site is small. It's only 3 or 4 hectares, and it was occupied from the Middle Bronze Age, about 2000 BCE, 4,000 years ago, through the Late Bronze Age, through the Iron Age, through the Persian, through the Roman occupation, or Greek, and then Roman occupation, then through the Byzantine occupation, and then finally the Arabs come and conquer, and there's an Arab occupation as well on the site, and even an Ottoman one, if I remember correctly. So any building that goes way down in its foundations, and it's really hard then to figure out, is the foundations of the building, if it's say 1400 BCE, they're just pulling it out of the air that day. But the top of the building, so these buildings continue to be used because they simply pile more stones on it as the ground level gets higher. And so a building could be used for 1,000 years with the same original foundation.
So how do you sort through all that, like all the different cultures that...
It's really hard. I mean, one, you have to have a very good analysis of what every artifact means, when it dates from, and you use all kinds of scientific methods to do that. Then you have to look at what we call stratigraphy, the layers of the site, and figure out where does this ceramic fall right where the floor would be, or is it deep down where the foundations of the building would be? And when you're looking at deposits with artifacts associated with it, you don't take the oldest date of the ceramic, you take the newest date, so the latest date. So if I'm digging a deposit and it's has a mixture of Middle Bronze, Late Bronze, Iron 1, Iron 2 ceramics in it, then that deposit will probably be dated to the Iron 2, because people living on tell sites like this where it's all layers, every time they dig down for a pit or a building or anything, they bring up the earlier stuff, and that then gets mixed in with what they're using.
Right.
So you don't use the oldest material to date a deposit; you use the newest material to date that deposit.
It just gets dug up.
Yeah.
Haskel, this has been so great. I'm going to wrap up the conversation by asking what you hope people are going to take away from the lecture on Tuesday.
I hope they just enjoy listening to me tell the stories, to have some real insight into the complexities of biblical research, and that it's not something simple, straightforward. You can't just say the text is historical, because texts like ancient texts like the Torah, or or the Torah in particular, are not written as history.
Yeah,
they're theological documents. God gave the Israelites the 10 Commandments, and the Torah is written down by Moshe, which is why we talk about the 5 books of Moses, but is under the inspiration of God. It's all about the history of the Jews, what the Jews should be like, how they should behave, where they came from. So the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the equivalent of the creation stories, for the crucible that created the Jewish people. So if you realize these are theological texts that have a lot of grain of histories distributed in there, lots of hints, but they're not written as a history book.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Haskel, this has been so much fun. I love history, and I find this kind of biblical archaeology just fascinating. I hope the lecture, The Ark of the Covenant, Where It Is Now, is a big success. Thanks so much for taking the time to stop by and talk to me today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
For our Classic 107 listeners, The Ark of the Covenant, Where Is It Now, is presented by the Music and Mavens Concert and Lecture Series. Takes place this Tuesday, January the 20th at 2 p.m. at the Rady JCC's Bernie Theater. For more details, visit radyjcc.com or go to classic107.com. I've embedded a direct link to the lecture page in the article about the talk that you can find up there now. Haskel, thanks again.
Thank you once again.